Right. Okay, so I'll just go through the whole lot clockwise. So starting up here, I mean this is fairly obvious, but the only issue is basically if this stays on after you've flicked the starter, it means the starter's fucked. You need to turn it off up here and get it fixed. Yeah.
So you come off the starter button, that stays on, then you're going to shut down.
Yep. Governor off, as in if this comes on in flight, then something about your governor's failed. It's actually continue the flight and just control it manually with the throttle.
And then what else are you going to do?
Switch it off.
Yes, correct. With most things, if they go wrong, you check them, then you switch them off. What does it mean if that flashes?
It means it's not working properly, basically.
Yeah, temporary. So you sensor see sometimes it will flash when we're recovering from an auto rotation, because the rotor RPMs are high. The engine won't go high. The engine will only ever go to the middle through the governor. So if the engine humps a lot and the RPMs are high on the rotors, that might flash.
Right. Okay. Brake is just that. It's nothing.
Yeah.
Oil pressure warning. This is the low pressure warning, which should coincide with the red on the arc down here.
Yes.
And that is land immediately.
Yes.
As in full on auto, get it down.
Not full on auto, descend under power, but the engine at some point might fail.
Okay.
I mean, when you say auto, I always have to say to everybody, when that lever's all the way down, irrespective of what the throttle's done or the engine's done, you're going to be autoing. Yeah. What we normally say for that one is land under power, so sensible descent.
Yeah.
But at some point the engine might seize, is what most instructors will say to you. I'll never say that because I've run an engine for 10 minutes with no oil and it'll work. So there's a good chance if you act promptly on that, you'll be able to get on the ground under power without it being an auto.
Okay. Main gearbox temperature is just land as soon as possible, and if possible reduce the power to see if that alleviates it, but it's still land as soon as possible.
Yeah, because we don't have land as soon as practical in this, but your default response to that, if you're tanking along at 90% doing 90 knots or something, your first port of call is to slow up. And what's just sensible slowest speed?
50.
Bottom of the power curve, yeah, 50.
Low fuel light, it's basically land immediately.
It's the
land as soon as possible.
Check if that's also showing under 10. It's land immediately.
Otherwise, as soon as possible.
Strictly, it's as soon as possible. But practically, I would say if that comes on and that's low, you can land as soon as possible.
Yep. Alternator warning light is land as soon as possible.
But
secondary indication via the battery charging indicator, and turning off unnecessary stuff.
But if the light comes on, what do you do first?
Turn this off and on again?
Yeah, but wait for a second after you switched it off.
It doesn't say it in the sheet.
Doesn't it?
I know it says it somewhere else in the book, but your sheet doesn't. But to turn this off for like a few seconds and then back on again. And it's just the alternator switch that we're flicking.
Agreed, yeah.
Moving back into, oh actually no, we'll finish these ones off. So high and low, obviously. Revs too high, revs too low, too high, increase, too low, decrease.
Yeah.
Clutch light, normal operation during startup.
Yeah.
If it flicks on during flight, similar to this one up here, reduce the power, see if it goes off. If it keeps on flicking back on again, land immediately. Sorry, land as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. Why might it flick on in flight?
Low oil pressure.
And also belts starting to go.
Which
is why you want to land as soon as possible.
Yep. Car peak temperature. Obviously the end arc is actually in the lower levels, so if it starts hitting, if it gets into the yellow, just flick this onto hot, check that it returns.
Yeah.
If it returns, I think you can leave it. If it stays doing weird stuff, land as soon as possible.
What you've got to be careful about if you're landing because you think the car peak's not working.
Whilst not using low power settings, keeping the power going.
You've got to be careful that when you lower the lever, because when you lower the lever, the correlator shuts the throttle or the butterfly in the carburettor, you might actually cause it to stall.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared for an unintentional auto-rotation. So as you lower the lever, the engine might cut. You might have to lower the lever all the way and auto-rotate.
There's also where potentially you do a running landing to keep it running, or by that point...
I probably would, but remember, you need a nice big field to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if it happened to me and I thought that wasn't working, I wouldn't be trying to fly back to the field. I'd get on the ground as soon as possible, because you'll very quickly, the engine will stall in typical UK flying conditions if that's not working. It's very serious, that not working.
Cylinder head temperature, if it gets into the red arc at the top, reduce power basically,
yeah,
and then land as soon as possible.
Yeah, so with a lot of the ones where the temperature goes high, if you reduce power and the temperature goes down, it's as soon as possible, but you could get back to base.
Yeah.
We normally say as soon as practical, because the fact the temperature's gone up there is an indication of something. And when is a time when the temperature might go up on all of those, and actually there's a simple solution whereby you can continue the flight?
I don't know.
So let's say we've been hovering a lot, we've been doing a lot of hover practice.
Yeah.
They've all gone high because it's a really hot day.
Yeah.
If we go into the circuit and they all come down again, that's just
it's
normal.
Okay. Right. Okay. So if they're all creeping high because we're running at high power for a long period of time.
Yeah, without the cooling effect of the air. Then if you transition into forward flight and they all go back to normal, that's deemed to be normal.
Okay.
Definitely, I've observed that the oil temperature, if it doesn't have 5 to 6 litres of oil in, and you're working it hard, that will tend to be higher. Okay. So sometimes you get...
if you're near like the level of 4 or something like that.
Yeah, so it's just like the oil, the purpose of the oil is to lubricate the cylinders, but also to take heat out of the engine. So because in the 44 we tend to keep the oil at the low end of what's acceptable, because that's what the engineers tell us to do, sometimes it accidentally gets transmitted into this aircraft, and you'll see people going flying when it's just over 4. Now just over 4 going flying is, you're at Rochester, you want to come back, you haven't got any oil, but I would say here keep it no less than 4.5. I mean, all right when it's cold, but when you start to get hot, you want as much oil as possible so that your temperature's managed.
Fine. So on this one,
if it goes too high, you're going to slow up.
If it goes too high, slow up.
Yeah.
And if it comes down, if it reduces, then it's okay.
Yeah.
If it goes too high and stays too high, I guess you're probably landing as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed.
And if it's too low in the yellow arc, you're probably on warm up. Just keep it running to get the temperature up a bit.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, if the oil temperature is too low, that's very unusual for a running engine. You would suspect the sensor.
Yep.
But you'd land as soon as possible, as in you'd probably come back to base, and then you'd tell someone that's
something's
way
not
too
right.
low. Yeah.
Cool. So oil pressure. Low in the red is land as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, land immediately.
Yeah.
Everything else is land as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So that light correlates with the low red oil pressure there.
Yeah.
Everything else is land as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Whether it's the yellow arc at either end or the red at the top.
You mentioned this already, but what might happen if the oil pressure runs in the yellow for a long period of time? You mentioned it already. It's one of your other things. It overlaps with something else. It's a very strange thing for it to say, but it says it in the manual. It says if the oil pressure is low, beware, because this might start to happen.
Well, the temperature probably of it go up if it's low. Oh, the clutch.
Yeah, because the clutch operates on oil pressure. If the oil pressure goes low, the clutch might suddenly decide to disengage.
Doesn't technically the clutch system lock the oil in?
Yeah, that's what Ken says, but what the book says for that, what the book says is if your oil pressure is low, beware, this might suddenly start to disengage itself.
Right.
In which case you've already told me the correct action for that, which is to get the ship on the ground.
Okay, so fine. So because that is connected to that, even though technically this is supposed to seal it all off,
Yeah.
it might not.
I don't know. I mean, like I say, what Ken's told us, I believe, because if I was designing it, that's the way I would have made it. But what this says is if the oil pressure is low, watch out. That might decide to come on.
Okay. And then fuel pressure. If it does something funny, the first thing you do is flick this off and on.
Yeah.
To check that it's working. Yeah. Either way, it's land as soon as possible.
Yep. So how many fuel pumps you got?
I'm guessing more than one, based on your question.
You got 2.
This is a thing for a secondary pump.
Yeah, which is the one that's in the bottom in the tank, and then you've got another one which is up behind the engine, driven off the engine.
Right.
So I think if it came on with you would check the switch, and then
so the switch only drives the secondary pump?
Yes, the mechanical one that's driven off the engine is driven all the time.
Right.
And the reason you need an auxiliary pump, because in an R22 you don't have any pumps at all. In the R22 the tanks are way above the engine.
Right, so it's gravity
fed. Here the tank goes down and underneath,
yeah.
So you need a pump to get it up. And then you've got the other one. Now if you've got lots of fuel, probably not an issue, because the level of your fuel is going to be higher than the level of the engine. But generally I would say if you were unhappy with that, yeah, you'd be landing in the field. Sensible landing in a field. Talk to us. The only issue we've got with it is we know from experience there's a dodgy wire on it, so sometimes it'll just go mad, indicating it's a kind of bad connection.
Okay.
So I would say if you're out self-hiring it and it went through that sort of mad phase but then sorted itself out, or went to nothing, I would continue the flight but come back to base, so it would be as soon as practical on any other aircraft.
So here, in theory, I think this is where we've got the chip detector warning lights, and if they come on and you've got some associated noise and banging and clattering,
secondary indication we call it.
Yeah, then you'll land immediately.
Yeah.
If it comes on and you haven't got a bunch of weird noise and stuff, you can continue the flight and assume it's a knackered sensor.
Yes, but all I say
you'd
to
probably
low-hours pilots is
go and land.
Land in the field. You know, you're in a helicopter, you land in the field, give us a call, let some other idiot fly it back to base.
Here we're going to have the engine bay fire warning light.
Yeah.
Just land immediately.
Yeah, enter off rotation.
Heat off, auto rotation.
Yeah.
Somewhere around here, I'm not sure, I'm assuming it's here, but I don't actually know, CO2 warning light.
I think the CO is the one down now.
Is that there? Is it there, is it? Okay.
You've got fire, which is there, and I think the other one you've got there is if the device gets too hot. If this gets too hot, it will just switch itself down.
You just leave it for a bit and then...
No, what's the drill? What's the drill if you've lost that?
Oh, carb heater hot.
And?
Governor off.
No. If you've lost that, what's the drill?
Oh, NR on to backup.
And? You said it. It's carb heater hot, NR to backup.
Yeah.
Land as soon as possible. You've got no reason to believe there's anything wrong with the governor. So you're not going to do anything to the governor.
So that's a separate system.
Yeah, you've got that on backup. You'd expect whatever you did with that would stay in the green.
You can also cycle it by turning off the alternator, then the master switch, then back on again in reverse.
Yes, but you remember when we've tried that. Ken's, he's not. You're recording this, yes. Ken's told me not to do it, but I have to be honest, I still do it because I think you should see what happens. Sometimes it can be temperamental with switching itself back on again, but you're doing it because you've lost it anyway.
Yeah.
But what have you not got when you switch off the master battery and the alternator? What have you not got?
Radio.
Radio. What is the other thing you just wanted to switch off?
The carb. No.
You're true. You haven't got your automatic carb heat. You're touching it now.
The governor.
With your master battery and alternator off, you haven't got your governor. You haven't got your radio, you've only got your pressure instruments, and your headset's going to be very noisy.
So your governor's still electrical, it's just not tied to this box of tricks. Okay. What else is there?
It's tied to something that's in there, but yeah, you lose your... it's the same in the 22 and the 44. your master battery and alternator off, you haven't got a governor. The benefit in the 22 and the 44 is that they run the engine, they run this off of its own sensors, which go in a separate circuit to the battery, so you still have those.
Okay.
So it becomes noisy, you've got no governor, but you know that your engine's working, whereas all you've got in this aircraft is that.
Okay. Is that all of them?
Carbon monoxide warning, you talked about that. What you're going to do if the CO warning comes on in there, we've had it, haven't we, in there, what do you do?
Open doors.
Open the cabin.
I think it's land immediately.
If you, it's another one where if you're hovering and doing a lot of hover work, you could transition into forward flight to see if it will go off. If it stays on for a prolonged period of time and you've got the heater off and the doors are open and you start to feel the symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, which are what?
Oh, you know, lightheadedness, blurred vision,
etc., etc.
Yep.
And also generally feeling a bit sick, euphoria, whatever they want to say, then you'd land immediately. And
yep. Okay.
Right, do you want me to?
Yeah. Drill it.
So, so you've got the you've just taken me through what they all do. So let's talk about something that's a bit less standard. So you're flying along, you're doing your T's and P's and all the rest of it, and you realise that you're pulling 85% on there.
Yeah.
But you're only doing 60 knots. What might the problem be? Because normally for 60 knots it'd be 60%, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, but you've slowly crept that lever up to be pulling 85%, and only...
this is probably buggered. The carb heat thing detecting is going wrong.
Yeah.
So it's either heating too much or cooling too much, or getting it the wrong way round. So therefore it's letting either too much air or not enough air into the engine.
True, but it is probably going to be to do with the carb, or one of the. So let's go back to basics. You're pulling more power, or that's asking for more power than you think you need. So you've obviously got a power delivery problem with the engine, probably.
Yeah.
It could be that.
It could be one of these has had it.
Could be something to do that. So you could check those are on. But the most likely thing is that something is wrong with this, but it's not letting more or less hot or cold air in. It's actually letting icing build up. So the orifice through which the oil fuel mixture goes is smaller. The governor is masking it by slowly opening the throttle, and unbeknownst to you, that's slowly creeping up, even though you haven't done anything.
It's the pattern of carb icing.
Yeah.
So one of this behaving weird.
Yeah.
RPM pounding to increase just to maintain RPM.
Yeah.
You've got carb ice, so you flick that onto hot, and you leave it, and you actually expect. Because let's say there is ice in there, then the ice dislodges, it goes into the engine,
and that hot works.
But what you actually expect is a sudden like dash in the power, because when the ice goes in, it makes the engine go funny for a second or so.
Yeah, what you'd expect to happen, we always say in the 22, if you forget about carb icing, you put it on full and wait 30 seconds. So what I'd expect to happen if it was carb, let's say you saw that was in the yellow, and you thought, bloody hell, that shouldn't be in the yellow, bang that to hot, that slowly goes up. Then what you'd expect to see is that ice that's in the carburetor will melt, and your power will slowly start to come, your percentage will slowly start to come down again.
Cool.
Okay, so that's the carb P. We talked about that. Good, isn't it? My mind's gone blank because you've answered all the questions. We've discussed all the things before we've
there's no asking some of the same ones again is fine, because
okay, fine.
I've only just crammed it, which means it's in there for a very short period of time.
Okay, so your low fuel warning light comes on.
If the equivalent of this says 10 litres or lower, land immediately.
Yeah.
If it's above, land as soon as possible.
But you're still going to land very soon, right?
Promptly.
Under power. So if that light came on at South Godstone Station, what would you do? I think you should land near South Godstone Station. I don't think you should ever mess around. If you think you're running out of fuel, you definitely do not want to be. You want to be getting the ship on the ground. You don't want to be in an enforced auto rotation. That's quick.
Didn't change his mind quick, didn't he?
Okay, alternator warning light. Wherever it is, yeah.
Land as soon as possible. Secondary correlation with this being yellow as opposed to green. You can cycle it off and on again. We talked about how you do that anyway.
Generally speaking, if a switch goes wrong, what do you do with that switch when you're happy it's broken?
Turn it off.
Turn it off, yeah, okay.
So once you've done an off and on again, if it's still knackered, turn it off.
Yeah.
And land as soon as possible.
Okay, you're flying along, smoke starts to come out of
that. Possible electrical fire, so land immediately. Put that onto hot. Put the
first port of call is, if I can see what it is, switch that off first.
Okay.
So if smoke's coming out of there, I'll switch off that first.
Turn that off.
And vent the cabin.
Right.
So it's always, if I can see what it is, switch it off, vent the cabin.
So I'm assuming, off vent the cabin, I'm assuming, because if we're assuming this is there for an electrical fire, and we're going into follow on, we're landing immediately because there's an electrical fire. That onto hot.
So your first thing is, if I can see what it is, switch it off and then vent the cabin. If it carries on smoking, what are you going to do next?
That to hot.
Yeah.
That to back up.
Yeah.
Governor off.
No.
No. Basically turn everything up. Turn all the power off.
Yes. So you strictly speaking, as per the book, it will be, if I can see what it is, isolate it, vent the cabin. If the smoke continues, master battery off, alternator off, switch the back up. Now what you're saying, I personally like the idea of, it would be a wonderful thing if I could remember to do it if it happened to me. But put that on hot first, then put that on to back up, then switch off the master battery to give it a little bit of time to switch to hot, because it's going to stop the minute you turn the thing on.
It takes half a second.
And then you haven't got that.
Yeah, you've got no radio.
Yeah, you've got no radio, you haven't got that, and you don't have to worry about switching the governor off because you haven't got it anyway.
Yeah.
But remember, if you can make it onto the ground, I will buy you and your wife a weekend in Paris, because I think you've got no chance in the case of that.
Right.
Yeah. So how could you get smoke out of the cabin? How could you get it out of the cabin?
Open the door.
And what else could you do to the ship?
Move it forward.
So when it's in trim, what's happening to the air?
Yeah.
So if you put it out of trim, you can never work out.
What you'll get more air through the side.
Trim, you create a low pressure on. I reckon if you kicked it that way, you create a low pressure there.
Oh, and so it'll suck it all out.
It'll suck the smoke out of this door.
Okay.
So you could, if you had the wherewithal, if you do that, I'll buy you a bottle of champagne on your first night in France as well.
Right. Okay.
It's funny, isn't it? It's because we very rarely practice that alternator master battery off. Indeed, as I say, Ken's told me not to do it because sometimes it doesn't switch on correctly and you've made your own emergency. Okay, so remember,
if
I can see what it is, switch it off, vent the cabin. If I can't see what it is, if that doesn't work, master battery off, alternator off. But if you've got the wherewithal, put that to hot first, and definitely put that to back up.
And in real life, your logic of determining that what you have as an electrical fire as opposed to a normal fire is that it's somewhere near something electrical.
There's no petrol forward of the bulkhead.
Yeah.
So there's no petrol. You know, you've got a fireproof bulkhead here. Everything over there is electrical.
Right.
So
it's basically electrical fire is standing up, because there's electrical ship back here as well, isn't there?
Agreed,
but
But the thing is about the...
You're going to have no idea which it is.
Yeah, agreed. The only time I can see that you might get smoke in the cabin from something wrong back there is got the heater on. So of course the other thing should have been switched. Make sure the heater's off.
Yeah, because that goes to off for any fire, and that's why it even says it there.
If there was smoking in the back near the exhaust, and that was on, because that draws air in over the exhaust. It must have a built-in fan. I don't think it does. I think it uses airspeed to get through. So I don't think this has a fan. That's why that doesn't work very well when you're not moving. Because
also, presumably, if you've actually got a fire in the back here somewhere, so you've got your warning light.
Yeah.
But you're probably quite unlikely to be able to see anything.
Well, that's what I think's funny about when Tim, and I love Tim and everything, but he does have this thing about check for secondary indication.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, if that light comes on, I'm not going to turn in circles to look for smoke behind me, mate. I understand aerodynamics. The whole point, the whole reason you've got a fucking sensor there is to tell you it's on fire.
Yeah.
I'm going to believe the sensor, get the ship on the fucking ground. I'm not going to go, oh, I can't see any smoke behind me.
Or, exactly. I don't see how you'd see it.
When you're on your test with him, just say check
secondary
communication. Yeah. But I trust it. That's what is there.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, so engine fire is lens will sort of use it in most aircraft. It's end ultra rotation, which means get the lever down, and then as soon as you're sunk comfortably in ultra rotation, kill the fuel, which means this one and ideally that one.
Right.
So if you've never done that one before, it's worth just doing it from time to time so you can get a feel for it.
It's got like a lock on it.
You got to pull the top one out, and then it's much easier than the Robinson.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about stuck pedals then? You flying along, you go to descend, and you realise that the pedals are stuck in the middle.
So it's not that the tail rotor's knackered, the pedals physically got something stuck in it.
One of your many electrical contraptions that you carry when you're flying.
It's got stuck in there.
Somewhere stuck in there.
Well, the first thing you've got to try and do is maintain some forward airspeed.
Yeah. Ideally
70 or 80 knots, because you're then using the aerodynamics of the tail fin to keep you pointing in the right direction. It's land as soon as possible.
It's a bit unfair because we've never done this, but if it was stuck in the middle, you could pretty much continue the flight, because the tail really, you said high speed, but really the shape of the tail's doing most of the work over 15 to 20 knots.
Yeah.
So you're gonna do a running. I'll give it you that you're gonna do a running landing. How would you approach the running landing? It's a bit of a mind bender, so it's a bit harsh to ask you this, but have a think about it.
Is this the one where you potentially turn the governor off?
You could turn the governor off?
Because...
So if this ever happens, but anyway, the way to do it is the pedals are stuck in the middle, so remind yourself which way it's going to go when you raise the lever to either run on or come to hover. So you'd raise the lever and the ship, you're this way, right? Raise the lever, you're that way. So you're going to come in sideways, trying to time the raise of your lever to run on like that.
Yeah. I've also seen...
Have the governor off, just at the last minute, shove the governor off before you raise the lever. And then if it went too far past where you wanted to go, close the throttle.
Right. Because I've seen videos of R22s practicing that, and lots of talk of fiddling around with the throttle to counteract.
In this aircraft, because of the tail, and one of the great features of this aircraft is you won't have to do that. Just keep your speed up, only about 20 knots. Keep your speed up, time the raise, turn around, skid on, and you slowly lower the lever. You slowly bend your this way.
Yeah.
Very slow. So if you're slow as you lower the lever, it won't matter that your feet won't work. Obviously, if you dump the lever, you probably go a bit like that. But if you're slow on the lever, you'll come around slowly like that. It's very unlikely to ask you that question.
Okay.
Okay, carbon monoxide lights come on there.
Right. Well, it's basically land immediately, but open the doors, get some air through.
Yeah.
And then...
What else are you going to do first, though? Carbon monoxide. First thing you're going to do is switch off the... What's the prime source?
Heater?
Yeah.
Turn the heater off, because that could be where the carbon monoxide's creeping through.
The thing that's most likely to put carbon monoxide in your cabin is a stupid way the heater works. So you switch off the heater first, vent the cabin, If the light goes out, you can continue the flight. If it stays on and you
start feeling a bit weird,
symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning,
land
a lot
immediately.
of headiness and funny blurred vision, all the rest of it, then you're going to land straight away.
But you'd probably you do it under power. You wouldn't be entering auto.
The only time you're going to enter auto rotation is when you have an engine failure, which you're going to detect because you get a massive yaw one way or t'other and the needles will suddenly split, or if you have an engine fire.
Yep.
Those are the main reasons you're going to enter auto. Everything else you're going to try and do a powered landing.
And just for amusing theoretical, the reason you do it in the case of a fire is because fire is likely to burn through the belt, or just because you've no idea what's going to die and therefore...
Or what might explode, given that you've got 90 litres of fuel set right behind you.
Assuming that happens, it does make an awful lot of difference what you're doing in much of this.
That's why you want to get on the ground as soon as possible.
Right.
The engine fire is more about, that's fuel burning, fuel and oil burning, and you could end up with an explosion or the tail melting or something.
Is that part of that theory that then in effect auto is also the fastest way to get down?
Fastest controlled way, yes. But what we found, you'll see now in the Robinson blurb, is that actually it says enter auto rotation, but if you've got the engine still running, use it at the bottom of the auto rotation. In other words, leave all the way down, needles will split, it'll do funny things, who cares. Right, I've got 200 feet to go, raise the lever, use the engine, normal landing, switch everything off.
Yep.
That's what the Robinsons now say on a number of things. These people have followed them eventually. So definitely if it was me, I wouldn't kill the fuel. I would auto, use the engine, because I'm normally only 1,000 foot off the ground, so I'm going to get to 400 to 500 feet off the ground in about 20 seconds. So I'm going to auto, control it, and then I'm going to use a lever at the end to get the ship on the ground, and then I'm going to switch everything off.
Yep.
But the proper drill as per the book is enter auto and switch off the heater and switch off the fuel.
Okay.
The other reason, you touched on it, but what's another reason you might be pulling that might be a lot higher than you'd expect? I've already said it, but
the outside air temperature, it's like a
if that's higher than you'd expect, it's because your engine's doing more sucking, working harder to give you the same amount of power. So one reason for that might be because your orifice that the air fuel mixture goes into might be partially blocked by ice. The other reason the engine might have to work harder is because
you're either high, hot, or humid.
Yeah, perhaps, or because of
the mags or the plasmas.
Yeah, because if you run it on just one of the two spark plugs that's in each cylinder, you won't get
the same amount of power.
Volumetric efficiency. What are you going to do if the main gearbox temperature gets too
high? Land as soon as possible. Reduce power.
Remember, with
reduce power. If it goes off, I think you can continue the flight.
Yeah.
If it keeps on coming on again, then it's land as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed. So a lot of the time what he's going to be looking for is that you don't panic into landing or autoing when you don't have to. So with any temperature, it's usually bring your speed back. If the temperature goes down, then you can continue the flight. In other aircraft, it will be land as soon as practical, which means return to base and tell someone. But you could say, I'll continue the flight, but I'm going to go back to base and tell someone. The only time when those temperatures might be high, but you wouldn't be you wouldn't be slowing up.
When you've been basically running at high power, you do lots of hovering, sitting still, everything's working really, really hard. Not getting much air cooling. So then actually the other way around, move it into some forward speed to get some air cooling, and hopefully they'll come back down again.
Where's the inlet for the air cooling in this aircraft?
Up there.
Yeah, it's that thing at the top. It goes in that thing at the top. Okay. We've done that. So So let's say, what about this one then? I'm very unlikely to ask you this one, but it gets your head thinking. You're doing 70, or you're pulling 70% on there. You know you're doing more than 50, but that suddenly starts to show 35 to 40.
Something's blocked in the pitot tube.
Yeah.
And therefore that's talking rubbish.
Agreed.
Not sure what you can do about it, but you probably want
to. I think, to be honest with that one, because we spend most of our time flying by attitude, you would just go, there's something wrong with that, and then what I would normally do is then think, well, what else is there? Is that sensor going to drive anything else?
The pitot tube doesn't.
You wouldn't think so, would you?
No.
But is there not a sensor which might feed something into the thing which works out maximum power on that? Not sure. That's probably going to be more static though, isn't it? So I think that one, I would just continue the flight.
Something interesting I've noticed recently, there's a load of videos, channels I watch on YouTube, focus around the G2, and they've almost always got like a GPS. The number of things they're doing where they correlate the GPS, the real speed, with the IIS is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Like using the difference between the two to determine the wind direction. So like if this says 60 and the GPS says 70, you know you've kind of got a bit of a tailwind.
You mean the GPS gives you ground speed?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do in the 22 and the 44. We'll comment on that. But with experience, you'll just know that anyway. But when you start flying with your runway HD, you'll
get the same thing.
You'll have the same thing.
Yeah.
Can't think of anything else. We talked about that failing. Oh, the only one we haven't specifically talked about is you're flying along on air and XXX comes up on there somewhere. What does that mean?
It means there's a sensor failure on wherever the X is.
Yeah.
And I guess you probably do some sort of secondary indication to sort of verify that whatever the sensor is, the thing that's sensing is still operational, and then you can probably continue the flight as normal and report it when you come back.
Yes, so it's not a panic thing. If the XXX though is something like rotor RPM or engine RPM, it could affect something else, like your governor might not work correctly if your engine sensor's not working. So you need to take that into account. So usually it's just carry on, flight, come back to base. If you were worried that it was going to affect the way the governor was working because it was XXXs against the engine, then you could switch the governor off or go to land, and if you see there's a problem with the rotor RPMs and the engine RPMs being synchronized correctly, switch the governor off, do a governor off landing, and then we'll come and have a look at it.
Okay.
If it's a temperature sensor or something like that, generally speaking, it's just complete the flight, don't panic.
What about the various different MLI arcs, the sort of the yellow one and the red one? So you can be in the yellow one, is it for like 30 minutes or 15 minutes? 4 minutes?
Yeah.
Right, but not very long.
Yeah, but in addition, you shouldn't be in the yellow one if you're doing more than 30 knots.
So under 30 knots, 4 minutes?
Yes, but it will start a timer. If you're in it for more than a minute, it'll put a number up there and it will start a countdown timer. I think it's 4, so the first number you see is 3. So it counts down. So the yellow is there for you for doing hover and slow speed work. You should never be in the yellow when you're doing more than 30 knots.
Yep. And the red you shouldn't be in, period.
Yes.
Could you even get to it, as in like if you...
Yeah. If it's on power and not flow, I mean basically you've got the power and